I'm a bus driver, and a recent dream left me hesitant to work night shifts for quite some time. I wonder if there's anyone familiar with the supernatural who can tell me if it's just a dream, or if it holds some deeper meaning. In the dream, it was a typical night, and I was driving the last bus as usual, with no passengers on board. Every bus stop along the route was empty, not a single passenger waiting. It felt odd, because I usually operate on a busy route, and no matter how late it gets, there's always someone waiting for the bus. But that particular night, I didn't see a single soul at any bus stop, and even on the main streets, there wasn't a person in sight. Occasionally, I'd encounter a few cars, but they would swiftly pass me by and vanish into the night. Just then, I suddenly noticed a white car appeared in my rearview mirror, its headlights glaring as it approached from behind. Upon reaching my side, it slowed down, driving parallel to me. I took a look at it instinctively, but that glance made my heart skip a beat. The driver's seat of the car was empty, yet the steering wheel was turning by itself. In the back seat sat a man and a woman, both with ghostly pale faces just like those of the dead. As soon as they realized I was looking at them, their faces turned towards me with an eerie smile, sending chills down my spine as their eyes locked onto mine. I quickly slowed down the bus, hoping to let it pass. However, the car suddenly turned a corner and headed straight for the bus. After a loud crash, my head slammed hard against the steering wheel. When I regained my senses, the car was nowhere to be seen. I got off the bus, trembling with fear, and circled around it but couldn't find any trace of the car. However, neatly arranged by the roadside were two pairs of shoes, a pair of black men's leather shoes and a pair of red high heels. Terrified, I hurried back onto the bus, ready to leave, but I was stunned to find that the once empty bus was now filled with people. Then, a woman approached with her head bowed and a hoarse voice. She said, "I'll pay for them. Now drive." With that, the woman pulled out a wad of cash from her pocket and stuffed it into the fare box on the bus. I nervously returned to the driver's seat, about to start driving, when I caught a glimpse of the mirror above. In the reflection, the bus was still empty, without a single soul. I stood up in fear, ready to flee, but was stopped by the woman standing at the door. With a firm push, I suddenly found myself sitting among the crowd at the back of the bus. The bus bustling with activity once again, I felt like I had returned to my normal life, and my anxiety gradually dissipating. Just then, I noticed someone sitting in the driver's seat ahead. I squinted my eye and tried to make out the figure, and he turned to look at me too. At that moment, it felt like a lightning bolt had flashed above me, snapping me out of my daze and causing a chill to run down my spine. Because I realized that the person sitting there driving was none other but myself. I tried to stand up and run, but the door slammed shut with a click. No matter how much I pounded and screamed for help, the door remained firmly closed. Gradually, the passengers on the bus shifted their attention to me, one after another, unsettling smiles slowly creeping onto their weary faces.
This is the most terrifying dream I've ever had, and even recalling it still gives me goosebumps now. The dream setting was that I would receive a text message every day from an unknown sender, but the message always contained a blurry photo. So, I always thought it was a mistake and didn't pay much attention to it. One night, before going to bed, I received another photo as usual. Upon opening it, all I saw was pitch darkness, except for a faint glow in the bottom left corner, as if someone had taken a distant shot of a house with only one room illuminated. As I stared at the photo, I couldn't help but think, now that everyone in my family is asleep, our house would look like this from the outside too. Without much thought, I tucked my phone under the pillow, turned to face the wall, and closed my eyes, preparing to drift into sleep. After lying there for a while, drowsiness gradually washed over me. In a daze, I heard a series of footsteps behind me. It was the sound of bare feet tapping on the floor, making a soft, rhythmic noise. I murmured, wondering who could be up so late, but there was no response. Instead of footsteps, a sharp scratching noise filled the air. It was like someone was scratching at the door with their fingernails, yet the sound was so close, as it was emanating from beneath my bed. I jolted awake, turning my head sharply, and found a dark figure looming by my bedside. Then, like a punctured balloon, it gradually deflated and slipped under the bed. Without hesitation, I sprang out of bed, oddly fearless in the dream, and used the flashlight of my phone to search under the bed. Yet, besides a storage box, there was nothing to be found. Just then, my phone buzzed again. Another message, another photo, this time showing someone using a phone to illuminate under the bed, frantically searching for something. It was a picture of myself. I jerked my head up in fright, but there was still nothing in front of me. I lowered my gaze to the storage box, pondered for a moment, and slowly pulled it out from under the bed. My heart pounded nervously, and after taking several deep breaths, I opened it. Fortunately, there was nothing horrifying inside, except for one thing: a photograph. I picked up the photo and examined it closely in the light of my phone. It was still taken in my room, but this time it focused on my desk. Feeling as if I were following instructions, I stood up and walked over to the desk, taking a seat. As soon as I sat down, I caught a strange scent, a sickly sweet smell mixed with a hint of something foul. I straightened up, furrowing my brows, searching for the source of the smell. But as I glanced down, I noticed a clump of hair in my lap. It was long, extending all the way from the drawer of my desk. I reached out and pulled the hair out, only to find that the other end was coated with something sticky and vile. I tossed the hair into the trash bin, but when I turned back to my desk, I found a few more strands. I reached out and pulled them out, tossing them onto the floor, but they brought out more strands with them. I kept pulling, and more hair kept emerging, as if it were growing from inside the desk. The more I pulled, the more appeared, an endless stream. Frustratedly, I kicked the stool aside, crouched down, and kept yanking at the hair with both hands. Soon, the floor was blanketed with a carpet of hair, writhing as if it possessed a life of its own when stirred by the breeze. Eventually, the hair was mostly cleared away. Buried deep within the drawer, I noticed what looked like a white sheet of paper. After parting the hair around it, I reached out and felt something cold, not quite like paper, yet oddly familiar to the touch. I grasped the white paper and pulled it out, and found it was another photograph. The image portrayed a face with a horrified expression. My own face. Once again, I lowered my head, trying to peer into the depths of the drawer, where I saw a face nestled within. It was a woman with bloodshot eyes, her face pressed against the drawer, eyes bulging so much they seemed on the verge of popping out of their sockets. Her lips moved up and down, like she was chewing on something. And from between her lips and teeth, black hair kept emerging incessantly. I let out a piercing scream, the sound echoing in the room as I kicked the table with all my might. It crashed to the ground with a thud. Sitting on the ground, I scrambled backward on all fours until my back hit the cold wall. In that moment, a pair of ghostly pale hands emerged slowly from the drawer, clutching a camera stained with blood. The incessant flicker of the flash accompanied the relentless click of the shutter. Meanwhile, my phone buzzed incessantly in my hand. I looked down, realizing it was the same unknown sender who sent me messages every night. He's bombarding me with a torrent of photos, one after another. Each captured a terror-stricken face of myself.
This is a dream I had when I was a child, and it was so terrifying that I still remember it vividly to this day. Back then, my grandfather had a cherished dagger, rumored to have seen action on the battlefield. However, my grandfather didn't like to talk about that past, so I wasn't clear on the details. All I knew was that he treasured it dearly and would meticulously clean it every day. However, I was mischievous at that time. Once, I secretly took the dagger out to show off to my friends. To my disappointment, after passing it around, they didn't show much interest, and soon we went to play elsewhere. It wasn't until I returned home that evening that I realized the dagger was missing. My grandfather was furious. It was the only time I remember him losing his temper. He wanted to punish me, but my parents intervened and stopped him. However, my grandfather's angry outburst frightened me. I ran back into my room, slammed the door shut, skipped dinner, and buried myself under the covers, crying until I fell asleep. In the dream, I found myself in a desolate landscape, where ankle-high dried weeds covered the ground. I could even feel the slight irritation as the weeds brushed against my feet. The air was thick with fog, but with a sweep of my hand, I could disperse it. Deep within the mist and darkness, there seemed to be a massive creature growling. The sound was so heavy it made the ground tremble slightly. In the dream, I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness and despair, a deep sadness gripping me. Yet, I couldn't identify the root of these emotions. After what felt like an eternity of wandering, the surroundings began to get noisy. I caught snippets of various conversations, ranging from high-pitched to low, with both male and female voices, and even heated arguments. The fog kept dispersing, as if an unseen presence was emerging and swiftly moving past me. As that unseen entity passed by, I felt a chilling wind blowing over me, even through me. Subsequently, the areas touched by the wind turned numb and rigid, as if my blood had frozen, particularly on the side where the wind had passed. Continuing forward, the ground began to swell with numerous mounds of earth, large and small, clustered together as if something was buried beneath them. As I approached, the mounds felt soft, with something seemingly wriggling beneath. Suddenly the mounds split open, revealing a multitude of hands, each palm adorned with a glaring eye, and the eyes were filled with bloodshot veins. These hands swayed aimlessly, just like flowers sprouting from the earth, their gaze unsettling me to the very core. At that moment, I heard someone calling my name, a voice so familiar it seemed to be my grandfather's. Without thinking, I instinctively responded. But in the next instant, the eyes on the palms of those hands turned toward me in unison, their bloodshot gaze fixed upon me. I tried to run, but my body refused to comply, paralyzed as the hands slowly emerged from the soil, dragging me inexorably downward. I struggled desperately, only to snap awake the next moment. I opened my eyes and found it was already midnight. Moonlight streamed in from outside the window, casting a ghostly glow over half the room. Suddenly, there was a knock on the bedroom door. My grandfather's voice came from outside. "Jimmy, open the door and let me in." Recalling his earlier outburst, I hesitated to unlock the door. "I won't do it. I'm scared you'll hurt me," I protested from behind the barrier. My grandfather's tone grew sharper. "Open up! Open up! Open up! I need to get in!" Grandfather's voice sounded different from usual, and it unsettled me a bit. Instead of responding, I covered my ears with both hands, ignoring his calls from outside the door. After a few more attempts, he fell silent altogether. However, the tranquility was short-lived, as a rapid succession of footsteps erupted from the backyard, accompanied by a shadowy figure darting back and forth outside my window. My room was situated on the far right side of the house, facing the backyard, with my parents' room on the left and the dining room sandwiched in between. I watched as the figure outside moved swiftly, passing by my window and hastening towards my parents' room. The brisk footsteps gradually faded into the distance, only to return swiftly without interruption. This unsettling cycle repeated several times. I stepped closer to the window, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious figure. However, just as I neared, the figure disappeared into thin air, yet the footsteps persisted. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and peered out of the window and spotted a pair of weathered leather boots lying on the ground. As the beam of the flashlight illuminated the area, the footsteps abruptly ceased. I scanned the rest of the yard, but found nothing unusual. However, when I directed the flashlight back to where the shoes had been, they were gone. With a sense of unease creeping over me, I cautiously moved the light forward, only to be startled as the boots mysteriously reappeared, as if moving of their own accord. My forehead was drenched in cold sweat. I trembled as I switched off the flashlight, and the footsteps resumed. When I flicked it back on, the footsteps stopped immediately. I switched it off again, this time without switching on. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw the shoes moving up and down on the ground, as if an invisible person was pacing back and forth in them. Terrified and teetering on the edge of sanity, I swiftly turned on the flashlight again, keeping it fixed on the shoes. As long as the light remained, the shoes remained motionless. Suddenly, I felt a slight tremor in the window glass. Stepping back, I shone the flashlight onto the window. That's when I noticed, outside the window, right above my head, countless hands pressed tightly against it, each palm adorned with a blood-red eye, glaring at me from outside. Among those hands was a pallid, grotesque face. The eyebrows on that face squeezed together, the mouth tightly shut, yet emitting my grandfather's voice. "Jimmy, open the door and let me in. Open the door and let me in. Open the door and let me in." I woke up drenched in sweat, realizing I was still dreaming. The next day, I developed a high fever and couldn't bring it down. It wasn't until evening when a friend of mine came over and mentioned that I had left a dagger with him. Half an hour after retrieving it, my fever miraculously broke. Ever since the dagger returned, I haven't had any more strange dreams, and I've never dared to touch that dagger again.